Welcome to my four-part series in digital pattern drafting. My name is Alyssa Ritter, and I am a professional costume designer for theater and digital media. In each episode, I will demonstrate a different approach to drafting patterns in Clo3D. In this video, I will show you how to produce a simple pattern block using parametric patterning and how to grade it in multiple sizes. Let's get started. Just like always, we're going to start in the library, and I'm going to go to Avatar, Female V2, and I'm going to choose FV2 Feifei. And instead of picking a predetermined size in the size folder, I'm actually going to close out of the library and go up to the File menu and click Avatar, and then Avatar Editor. And this will bring up a window that I can use to type in any measurement I would like my avatar to be. So you could see all the measurements represented on the avatar over here, and then we could type them in this window. There's a couple different methodologies to this, to how you enter measurements. In general, enter measurements in height first and then circumference. You can also choose a few different ways to do it. You can do it by height, total height, which is from the ground to the head. You could do it by HPS height, which is the ground to the shoulder point right here, or you could type in the inseam height. I'm going to go ahead and do total height, and then down here for the width you have a couple different options too. You could do it by bust circumference, you can do it by under bust circumference, or you could do it by weight. They all have their pros and cons, and so it's worth trying out a few different ways to see what kind of avatar gives you the most accurate model to the person in real life that you're working with. For this project, we're going to go ahead and work with weight. And for total height, I'm going to type in 62 inches. And for weight, 120 pounds. That of course is kilograms, so I'm going to go ahead and change that to pounds, and just making sure that inches are here as well. 120. There you go. And now I get to choose total body shape, and again, you just really have to click through these to figure out like what's going to give you the most accurate representation of the person that you're making this garment for. I'm going to go ahead and keep it on this square shape here for now. Under here, there's a few options. We have simple, which has only very few measurements to type in. Then there's basic, which has more. Advanced dress form, which has even more, and the most measurements are advanced human body. It's best to just start with basic to see if you can get a satisfactory avatar from these, or basic or simple. But if you find that you really need that extra detail, then go ahead and try out some of the ways as well. Now, since I flipped through those, it messed with my total height, so I'm going to go ahead and type that in again. So I want 62, I want 120, and then I simple inch square person. For bust, I'm going to go ahead and type in 33. For waist, 28, and low hip, we'll do 38. And that's all the customization that I'll do today. I'm not going to mess with this inseam, but if I was, it would be best to do that first because that's a height measurement. So once you're happy with the way the avatar looks, go ahead and just close out of the window. Now that we have our avatar, let's go ahead and create a pattern block. Clo3D has a very convenient tool called Parametric Pattern. It's right here in the editor little selector in the file menu. Go down to Parametric Pattern. Go ahead and click that, and this window will pop up, and again, there's just measurements upon measurements. And this is entirely customizable to the block that you want to create. Let's go ahead and I'm not going to type any custom measurements today, but it's fun to play around with, and if you have a block that you really like for a certain person, then you can save those measurements for later or load them in at another time. So very convenient. For now, I just want to make sure these are the default measurements, so I'm going to click Reset, and then down here I'm going to click Create. And once that happens, the little ghost of a pattern will appear in the 2D window, and I can just click anywhere to make it real. You can also add a sleeve, but we're not going to do that today. Alright, so now that I have my pattern, it's a very basic pattern, I'm going to want to add some darts to it to make it more of a traditional traditional basic block. So let's go ahead and use the pattern Edit Pattern tool or the Z tool to right click these center fret lines and unfold symmetric editing with sewing on both the front and the back. Conveniently, the parametric pattern just kind of appears already sewn and ready to go, so we can just go ahead and press simulate to get it in place. And then, yeah, you can see that there's some gaposis in the arm's eye here that we can definitely ease into a dart. And there's some other fitting things too. This block was not made for this little avatar, so but we're going to go ahead and take the steps to fit it now. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to change this block a little bit. I'm going to just raise this arm's eye. And so if I go to the Edit Pattern tool with the Z hotkey and grab this the upper side point right here, I can just go ahead and as I'm clicking it and dragging it, you can see that a pink line appears. That's a guideline that's telling me that I'm extending it along the same line. So I'm not like making it bigger or smaller somehow. I'm keeping that same line. That's what I want. And it doesn't really matter how high up you go. What you want to do is while you're still left clicking and dragging, right click and you can decide how much you want this to move up. So, which is really great because I want it to move up consistently on both the front and the back. So I'm going to type 1 inch for distant moved and click OK. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the back. So dragging up, looking for that pink guideline, right clicking, typing in 1, and we're good to go. Another thing that I want to do is on the front piece, I just want to lower this center front line a little bit. Also doing that left click and drag, but right click to type in an exact measurement, and I want to lower it by 0.5 inches. And the next thing I want to do is since I'm gonna put a dart in here, I want to create, but I don't want to affect how much the waist seam fits. I'm gonna go ahead and drag this line out 2 inches. So just kind of getting that line going and then typing in 2. And then actually for that one, because I lowered that other one, I don't actually want to drag along the same line. I want to drag it at 90 or I guess at 180 degrees. So I'm holding down the shift button to give me these guidelines. Then I'm going to left click, type in 2, and we're good to go. And that will maintain the truing of these lines if there ever was any. It doesn't look like it. Okay. So those are some just basic pre-fitting adjustments that I wanted to make. And now I'm going to go ahead and put the dart in. Oh, before I do that, let's give ourselves a horizontal balance line. So I'm going to grab the internal line tool and then I'm going to click at this armpit here and then holding shift, I'm just going to end at this center line. And then that'll give us just kind of a balance line to work off of to check our fit as we're going. Okay. Now, to add the darts, I'm going to go to the split line tool or add point tool, which is just the X hotkey, and I'm going to go to the bottom of this front pattern here, and I'm going to, while the little dot is gliding along the waist seam there, I'm going to right click, and then I'm going to do uniform split, which is going to split this line in half equally, number of segments 2. Click OK. And then that's going to be the center of my dart. I need to add a point on each side so that I can have dart legs as well. So I'm going to still using the same tool, just right click on that line again. Rather than uniform split, I'm just going to type in 1 on this first line, making sure that's where it's showing up, and then click OK. And then same on the other side. I'm going to type in 1 and on the other side. And that's going to account for the amount that I made the waist wider when I dragged that line over. All right, so now we have 3 points. I'm going to go to the Edit Pattern tool or the Z hotkey, grab the center point, and I'm just going to drag it upwards to this horizontal balance line. And I'm looking at these dart legs. You can see the numbers generating, and I want my dart legs to be equal. So I'm just kind of moving it until I get about an equal amount on each side, which that looks pretty close. Go ahead and drop it there. Now I'm just going to use the segment sewing tool with the N hotkey and just sew those together and go ahead and simulate. So now I've just taken this width that was on the side seam and I've transferred it to the middle of the pattern. We still have some gappy pointness here, and which means we still need to have some fullness that we need to rotate into this dart. So what I'm going to do is the fullness point tool, and I'm going to go ahead and click that fullness point. I'm going to click the top of my dart, and then I'm going to click in the arm's eye where I see on the 3D window where most of the fullness is. I'm just going to go ahead and click there, and then it gives me this option of how much I kind of want to close that fullness. I'm going to go ahead and right click and type in -1 inches and click OK, and then we'll see what that does. All right, so that rotates that fullness that we saw in this arm's eye into that front dart. So it makes that dart bigger, but ultimately that's looking like a much better fit. So that's looking pretty good. We want to make sure this dart is still trued. So if we look at the edit sewing tool, then yeah, that looks like that's good. But you know, it's possible that this is going to sew into a kind of a chunky kind of I guess corner there. So to true this dart, what we can do is go to the edit sewing or the edit pattern tool and left click each dart leg. Then when they're both selected, right click and go down to shape dart cap and then click that. And it's giving us this guide that's showing us a preview of what that shape will look like at the bottom of the pattern when the dart is sewn. So you can use these little points that you can move to like make that the curve that you want it. This already looks like a really nice curve, so I'm going to go ahead and press enter to complete. And then it's showing me here then it added a curve here and added a curve here, and it made a smoother line here. I'm not quite happy with what it's doing at the center front. It's adding a little bit of point, but I'm just going to leave that for now. All right, so we've added a dart to the front. The fit looks pretty good. We've trued the dart. Let's go ahead and work on the back. So for the back, there's rather than moving this back seam over like we did the front, I think that we should just add a dart in and take all of the fullness out of this gapping um, in the arm's eye. So to do that, I'm going to go to the internal line tool or the G hotkey, and I'm going to go roughly around where I think the fullness of the scapula is, and I'm just going to go ahead and click and then go up all the way just straight up, holding the shift key to about mid arm's eye, or about where the fullness of the scapula is, maybe like right here. All right, and now I'm just going to go to the Z tool, edit pattern tool, right click and say cut. And it made the teensiest, tiniest little cut in my pattern that when we go to the fullness point tool, I can go ahead and click on that point, click on where all of that bulk is in the arm's eye, and then I can start to close it. I'm going to go ahead and right click again, do -0.5 inches and see what that does. And then I want to go ahead and sew this with the segment sewing tool and simulate. And yeah, you see how that just closed that up really nicely. That looks pretty good. Now, another fun tool for manipulating patterns in Clo 3D is the rotate dart tool. So to use this tool, you're going to go back to the edit pattern tool. You're going to grab those dart legs again, right click, and rotate dart. Click that, and now it just asks me where you want it, and I think I want it about, and I think I want that back dart to be a shoulder dart. So I'm going to go ahead and click in the shoulder, and it says, okay, where do you want that shoulder dart to end? And I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe around here. And it says, okay, how much do you want to close that dart? And I'm just like moving my mouse and I'm giving it an option. I want to close the dart all the way, so I'm going to go ahead and put it here and then click. And then it says, okay, how long do you want the dart? And I'm like, well, that's a lot of options. So I'm just moving the mouse to choose the length, and then when I like it, I'm just going to click again. And it just moved that dart there, and you can do that endlessly. And look at that. So I'm still don't have my gaposis. Everything still fits nice, but now all that fullness has been converted into the shoulder. So very cool and fun to play with. Okay, now now I'm seeing that I need to true this curve here. The most convenient way to do that is to use the walk pattern tool, which is right here, walk pattern. And so I'm just going to click that tool, and then I'm going to click on this outer shoulder seam on the front, and then I'm going to click on the corresponding seam on the back. And when I do that and I walk my mouse along this line, it shows me it walks that pattern along with it. Of course, it wants to keep walking it down that dart, we don't want, but it gives me a good sense of where that notch should go. And in fact, if I right click, I can add a notch to the walked pattern, and it'll add a notch to that pattern right there. See how it did that? So I know when I sew this together, that's where that dart goes. Very convenient. And while it's still here, I'm going to actually press enter, and I'm going to do this again. While it's there, I can right click and say move walked pattern to intersection, and that will give me an opportunity to address this arm's eye drama here. Let's see if I can edit this curve. I clicked the edit pattern tool, and then I clicked on the curve, and no Bezier handles showed up, which tells me that this curve has all these curve points in it that it thinks that are optimized, which is handy when you go to grade the pattern because it can calculate it better than the Bezier handles. But since I'm still working on it, I want to go ahead and delete all curve points and redraw that arm's eye with the curve tool or the C key command. So I can go ahead and draw that arm's eye like that. And that's that's pretty close around the back, but let's see, I might drag that a little bit in a little bit more, and that looks better. And then the front, I want to do the same thing. And when I click on it, no Bezier handles, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those curve points and draw that arm's eye, keeping in mind that I want a nice smooth line here. So that looks pretty good now. That looks much better than it did before. I can go ahead and do the same thing and walk the pattern up from the bottom, so clicking on these bottom and then right click, move walked pattern to intersection. And this is a good opportunity to true this seam here too, which shouldn't need to be trued since I generated the pattern, but just using the Z tool to fix that, and just now looking at my 3D window, looking at my 2D window, and checking that curve to make sure it's nice and smooth. But yeah, that looks really good. Um, to get my patterns all back on grain, all I have to do is do Control or Command A, right click the patterns, and then rotate and reset along grain line. That was very slight for this one, but it made sure that it was straight up and down, which makes it easier to edit. Now that we have our pattern, I'm going to show you how to grade it in multiple sizes. So there's a few different windows that we need to know about to make this happen. The first one is in the object browser up here. It might not be viewable for you, so you might need to use these arrows, but it's this icon right here called grading, and that will pull up the grading object browser, which we need because that's how we determine how many different sizes we're going to be grading. So what we got to do is use Control or Command A in the 2D window, select all of our patterns, and then click Add, and then click Assign. Okay, so it's telling me all Bezier curve points of all patterns will be changed to free curve points to grade the size properly. Yeah, that makes sense. It just needs to optimize them, which will make them unable to edit the curves, but it'll make it so they will grade better. So I'm just going to say, yeah, that's cool. All right, I'm going to delete this first group, so get it out of the way. So we're going to work with size group 2, and what we want to do is use this plus sign right here to add as many sizes as we want. I think I'll grade in 2 more sizes, and then I can double click in these sizes to name them. So let's say this is the small, let's do a medium, and then a large. And go ahead and click out of that. And it's saying that the base one is that I'm working with here is the small, because that's the first one that I assigned to this size group. All right, so that's how I determined how many size groups I need, but I can't actually do any grading in this window. What I need to use is the Edit Grading tool, which is right here. And when I click that, a bunch of these little dots will pop up. Those are basically all the points that I can use to edit the grading, and they just got a little bit darker to reaffirm that that's what was going on. And there's a few different methods to grading. You can go ahead, you can click on a line or a dot, and you can, let's do the dot, and you can say the distance in inches between the medium size and the small size on the x-axis is 1 inch. And that will move the medium out 1 inch. Then the distance between the medium and large, oh, actually the from the large and the small is 2 inches. So I'm grading them all out from that small size. And so I can move them out on the x-axis and I can move them out on the y-axis like that. So that's one method. The other method is you can, I'm just clicking on another point to show you, you can offset. So you could say, well, all the sizes are 1 inch bigger on the x-axis and 1 inch bigger on the y-axis. Um, 1x, and it didn't like that. So why didn't you like that? It's okay. So I should mention that uh, um, I should mention that when you're working with the x and the y axis, imagine that negative for the x is this way and positive for x is this way. For y, negative is this way and positive is this way. So to make this longer, I'm going to have to do -1 and then -1. There we go. And then to make it longer, I'm going to have to do 1 and 1, and that's going to move it out. Okay, so I find those to be a little bit stubborn. My favorite one to use is the arrow key movement, which is down here. And that one works by, if I type in 0.25 here, for example, which it already is for me, and then I go to a point, I use the arrow keys to move it down in increments of 2.5 inches at a time, which is really handy. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, and that makes an inch, which makes it line up with these other ones. I just think it's so much more intuitive, and I can watch what's happening as I work. And so that's my favorite way, but you can always go back and it'll show you the size disparity, and you can manually edit all of these things. There's other ways you can have more control over here. Edit curve grading, edit grading each, each size individually rather than all of them at once, which is what it's on now. I will say that you do really have to understand grading rules for this tool to be useful for you. But to give you a quick sense of grading rules, essentially, it's about, what I like to do actually is go to my favorite brand and then look at their size chart and look at how many inches difference they have between sizes, and that's what I will use. And then keeping in mind that generally people will get wider, but they get wider more than they get taller, or they get narrower more than they shrink. So you don't necessarily need as much height difference than you do between sizes as you do width difference. Also, I like to add more wearing ease for like my upper sizing than I do for my lower sizing. So if I had like 2x, 3x, they're usually like 3 or 4 inches difference, whereas the smaller sizes, like small x or small, are only like 2 inches difference. Um, yeah, but really a lot of this is just understanding and experimenting and really getting to know your own grading methods. And I will say that once you've got some sizes graded, all you have to do is go back to the grading in the grading window in the object browser, and then you can click all these different sizes to see what they look like, and then you could simulate. So you can bring in a bunch of different sized avatars and test your grading. Look at this terrible grading on here. But it's very useful tool, and you can experiment a lot with this. And you can export all of these at once as a file export. You can export them as a DXF, or you can export them one at a time by going back to your by just selecting each size and then exporting them one at a time. So yeah, that's how to create a block in Clo3D, manipulate darts, and then create different graded patterns.